Welcome to this episode of Dialogues with Creators. This one is a triple treat for me. First, I have freelance writer and friend Amber Nagle back. She was one of my first guests when I started this podcast in spring of 2022. Second, I was planning on having her speak for about 5 minutes as part of a longer solo podcast I would do. And she was so interesting and helpful that it turned into a full episode. And third, I learned something, and I believe you will too. This episode delves into the use of generative AI for writing. I plan on a future episode to dig deeper. Perhaps it will be the next one. And I'm doing a lot of research on the subject so that I can speak with some level of knowledge versus just plain opinion. I think you will enjoy this conversation with a creative and creating person, Amber Nagle of Catherine, Georgia. Because I was interested in learning more about how generative AI is used by professional writers, I've asked a colleague and friend, Amber Nagle. Many of you have probably read her material in Georgia Magazine and many other places, and she's written books as well. We've talked about her use of it, and so I wanted to hear her thoughts and have her share those with the audience. Hi, Amber.
Hey, Barbara.
Thank you for joining me again. You were one of my first guests on the podcast 3 years ago.
Thank you for having me again.
I'm finding that I am sort of going back to some of the previous people for see where they are and for their wisdom. So, and you have a lot of wisdom about this subject. So could you share with us your experiences and use of it?
Sure. I wouldn't say that I have a ton, but talking to other writers, I think that I've used it for more applications than some of the other writer friends that I have. So we'll go back for, I started using ChatGPT. So I also have to say my husband is kind of a software nerd. And so he started experimenting with it for code a long time ago. And so he actually is the one that introduced me to ChatGPT before it was really even on the news or anything. And so at the time, I was managing editor of a magazine down in Florida. And so before certain content and editorial meetings, we would say, hey, we're going to talk on Wednesday and we're going to talk about the next issue. So you might want to jot down some notes about what we might feature in the spring issue or the winter issue or the holiday issue. And so I would go on ChatGPT, this was early on, and say, hey, can you give me 5 or 6 ideas for articles for the spring issue of an upscale lifestyle and leisure magazine, similar to Garden and Gun, that features travel, fashion, health, and wellness articles. And it would spit out a few ideas. And one of them might work, none of them might work. So then you would kind of have to go back to the drawing board and say, can you give me some more? So I used it kind of as a brainstorming tool early on when I didn't hear very many other people talking about it. So that was kind of my early exposure to it. And of course, it's true what everybody says. It just keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So when I was using it early on to generate ideas for content for that magazine, it didn't do a fantastic job. But like 2 months ago, when I asked it for content for a winter issue for this year, it did much better. And it really gave me some great ideas. I'm not going to say that I took the ideas as it provided to me. I still had to figure out how they would work together or maybe change the scope a little bit. So that's kind of how it was used early on. There's so much. So if I jump around too much, just stop me. But
no problem whatsoever.
Say, for example, like you had mentioned to me that in December when you and I were in the car together, that I had mentioned to you about this oyster article that I had to write last year. And so I remember that I knew a little bit about oysters. We felt that it would make really great imagery. We were already going to talk about the South Carolina Low Country in that issue. So we were working on this oyster article, and I couldn't come up with a great title for it. And so that's another application of AI. You can go into one of the AI platforms and say, hey, I've written an article about oysters, and it talks about the history of oysters in America, certain ones that, are common along the East Coast. And what would be a clever title for this? And I think it came up with The World is Your Oyster. And I think we went with that. I can't remember if we went with that or not. But here again, it's a great tool for brainstorming and giving you something to start with sometimes. So that's kind of the early on stuff. Let's see. Like I said, I'd made some notes because I've used it quite a bit. Okay. In the last year, we lost an editor in a magazine that I was working with. We lost someone who was a very strong editor. And I was able to upload writers' documents into one of the AI platforms and say, here are our writing guidelines. We use a lot of AP style with these exceptions. Look at this attached document and help me edit it for punctuation and grammar. Also fact check it for me. And here are the style guidelines that we use. And flag where you feel there's a mistake so that I can review it. And it did. So it was kind of like having an assistant that did a lot of that. Like I would go over the article first and do a first pass, but everybody misses stuff. And so it was actually helping me edit. It would come back with the document. It would flag places for me to see. It doesn't always get everything right. So, and for example, it really struggles with numbers. It can't get the AP style guidelines right on the numbers. So it almost never did fix that for me. But that's one of those things where when there's a lot of numbers in an article, I pretty much look at every application, you can kind of go through that. But it did catch things that I didn't catch. And when I would go through and start looking at it, I was amazed that I had missed something so obvious. But it would catch it because it's not a person. People make mistakes and it does too, but it catches some of the mistakes that we make. Mm-hmm. So I've also used it in my own personal writing. Sometimes if I'm writing something, I'm not sure if it is correctly, punctuated. And I'll upload a sentence and say, can you check and see if this is punctuated correctly? And sometimes it says, yes, it is. And sometimes it says, no, it's not. And I'll look at it and I don't like to spin my wheels for more than like 5 or 10 minutes on one sentence because then you would never get anything done. But it's a quick way. So sometimes if I don't like the way it's punctuated, if it looks weird, I'll say, can you suggest a rewrite of this sentence? Don't change the content. And it will provide like an option that it's like, okay, so my punctuation was incorrect. It served me the correct punctuation. I think it looks weird. And well, here's an option that I would have if I wanted to change it altogether. So that's another application anyway.
Okay.
So, very helpful. Okay. And like I said, it's kind of I see it as a tool. I don't see it as a crutch. I feel like a lot of people that are using it right now, it's becoming a crutch. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a term for that. I wrote it down because I've heard people talk about it in the last month. It's called creative atrophy. It's kind of something that happens and you don't even realize it's happening. It becomes a crutch. So a few minutes ago when we were talking, I actually referred to it as an assistant. Mm-hmm. Well, it's just like a person. Sometimes you become to, depend on that person to catch certain things for you or do a certain task. And I can see where there's a danger of becoming too dependent on it because it is right there at your fingertips.
Yeah. You mentioned that you us being in the car together, we were going to an event, and it was, I believe, the article about the oysters that you. Can you tell that story? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
When you and I talked last week, you had mentioned that, and this is what I think I remember about that. While we were writing the oyster story, here again, a lot of times when you're doing magazines, you try to make all of the articles kind of fit together in a certain way. And we had also considered putting an article in that issue about champagne, because that's kind of the big thing. People drink champagne and eat oysters. That doesn't sound good to me, but it'd be a thing.
The whole concept of oysters is out there, but for me, but whatever.
So we were considering also including a story about champagne.
Okay.
So I had gone on to one of the AI platforms. We could not find a writer. It was very late in the game. We ended up not doing this. So let me just kind of say that because we ended up with more advertisers and we didn't have enough pages, but we didn't have a writer. It was very, very late in the game as far as the magazine needing to go to print, say, the following week. But we thought that we could probably generate an article, maybe a 2-page article about champagne, just something to kind of run alongside that oyster piece. And so the editor and publisher of the magazine said, let's just see what AI does and use it. But then I would need you to kind of go in and fact check it and maybe put it in your voice. So I did. I went in and I said something like, start me off with a 800-word article about champagne, briefly mention the history of champagne, talk a little bit about what makes it different, how it became associated with celebrations, and why it pairs so well with oysters. Okay, so I was just going to see what it spit out. And it did spit out something. But as I fact checked it, it was so wrong on so many things. And it got something so I don't do a lot of champagnes and wines and drinks. But for a person that picked up the magazine that was very knowledgeable, it would have really stood out to that person. So so when you hear people talk about you really have to fact check it, it is so true. It actually was talking about Dom Perignon, which I don't think that you can have an article about champagne without mentioning that. And there were at least 2 facts that were incorrect. So anyway, so it gave me a structure, it gave me an idea, but it was not necessarily usable in the state that it was in. Plus, the voice was a little robotic. So to massage it into what we would have needed, which, like I said, we ended up not using it, would have taken 2 or 3 hours of work.
Uh-huh.
And it would have probably taken me 4 hours to write it from scratch and do the research. And anyway, so I think that that's probably the application that we were talking about because it was related to the oyster piece.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a little different. The oyster piece was very easy to write, and I think I wrote that one.
Yes. If you had used the champagne one, how do you think it would have been titled? Would it just have had no author?
So we talked about that. So that was one of the conversations that we had. How would we present that? Would it be written by staff, or would we just put nothing at all? Or would we say, something about this article was AI generated? We ended up not having to figure that out because we ended up not using that. But I will say this, in that publication, let me go to another application of AI for freelancers. Another application is last Christmas, I was asked to write a very long, sweet story that had to do with Christmas or holidays for a newspaper that I write for in South Georgia. And they've asked me to do that before, and I'm kind of getting down to the to the stage where I don't have a lot of really great ideas. But I came up with an idea called Reindeer Boot Camp. It was my own idea, and I thought, wouldn't it be kind of a cute story that people could share with their kids? It's like if a reindeer wants to join Santa's sleigh team, he has to go to Reindeer Boot Camp, and he has to go to all these classes and all this stuff. So I came up with that idea, and I sat down and I wrote it one day. It was very long, and they ran it on the front page of the newspaper for the holidays. But the problem was the editor of the newspaper said, how am I going to illustrate this? Because I had all these very magical scenes and, a lot of interaction with Santa Claus, and then trial runs where they're landing on snowy rooftops and just all this stuff. So I said, well, the editor, I told him, I said, I don't know how you feel about this, but I could try to generate the photos or the illustrations with AI. He said, well, see what you can get, and we will just identify it in the newspaper as AI generated. So I think he used 4 or 5 the illustrations that I had generated of these reindeer doing these crazy things. I think there was a reindeer in a classroom, was a Santa was talking to a reindeer. There was a team of reindeer landing on a snowy rooftop, and then also one of the reindeer instructors, I think I called him Sven. Here again, this was months ago, so it's hard for me to remember, but I had described him in the story, and I put the description of Sven, one of the reindeer instructors, into AI, and it spit out someone that looked very similar to what I had imagined in my head. So he used that one too. But he, when that article ran with those pictures, he actually noted that the illustrations were AI generated.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fair. A lot of people probably would say, well, somebody sat down and somehow painted these, and that's not the case.
Right.
At all. So, so that's how that got credited. Then also, I think I mentioned to you in December when we were talking that for the magazine in Florida, we had a food writer that always had recipes in each issue. And sometimes, sometimes if you don't have a picture, like if somebody has a recipe for spaghetti, of course you can go online and you can find stock photography of spaghetti. But she was creating very, very unusual things. And she was not a photographer, but she was a very great recipe person. So we would take her ingredients, and I would put them in AI and say, put all of these ingredients on a cutting board, on a linen tablecloth, with a glass of wine next to it, on a beautiful kitchen island with light streaming in a window. And it would give me 4 examples. It's just like the writing part, though. It gets a lot wrong. You have to look at it. And for example, with a fork, it may put 7 prongs on a fork. You have to look at it. Or I might say, on next to the cutting board, there's a plate that has a sardine on it. There was a recipe where this person had included sardines, and when AI generated that, the sardine was like the size of a shark. It was just huge. And in I don't know a lot about sardines, but when they come in those cans, they're tiny. And so anyway, I had to keep reprompting, the sardine on the plate is only 4 inches long. And then it would put the sardine and it would have 3 eyes. And, so, it's just really kind of wacko sometimes how. But every now and then, like one of them it was banana nut bread that had some other ingredient in it that's not typical, and I can't remember what it was. The banana nut bread was in a loaf pan, and it got that right, but the scale was way off. It had a banana next to it that was giant, or it might have a banana next to it that was the size of a pecan, or a pecan. So it's just really weird. But we also, used it a few times to illustrate those recipes. So, it's pretty amazing at what you can do. It misses a lot and you end up having to clean up a lot of things. But here again, it's a tool. And sometimes when it saves you a couple of hours, you just go, wow, it would have taken me so long to do that. That's very helpful. And another application in my personal life, if somebody does assign me an article to write for someone, the first step is I try to just kind of jot down all the things that I feel a reader would find interesting in an article. And that's going to be, kind of like a loose outline. Then I try to assign word count numbers to each of those pieces. You add information and put it in one of the AI platform generators and say, build me out a loose outline from these elements, and it will. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So you mentioned that you'd seen its improvements, though, over the last 4 years that you've been using it.
Yeah.
About the time.
I don't know exactly how long I've been using it, but I know I was in our circle of friends and coworkers, I was one of the first that started using it. A lot of people just absolutely refused to even look at it, which, I understand it is an ethical dilemma, but here again, if you're not using it to plagiarize, if you're not allowing it to ruin your creativity or your voice, I also feel that there's a very big danger that people who use it a lot, it will change their voice. And I've actually seen that. Here again, I'm not mentioning anyone's names, but I do know a writer that started using it more. And I can tell that this person is using it a lot because her voice is completely different. And I don't know how to say this, but it's almost like flowery and there's a lot of adverbs in it. I'm like, that's AI. It's just AI.
Yeah. Yeah. As a professor, I was able to detect AI pretty quickly because in a student's writing, because I know how 18, 19, 20-year-olds write, And, they would start producing this stuff that had words they would not use. And I know they didn't know the meaning of them. And then there's certain syntactical patterns in AI that, it just does it. And you can, and I imagine you can prompt it to say, stop using those syntactical patterns. But the students don't know how to use it enough. They're just using it as a shortcut. And I think a lot of people are using it as a shortcut. And that's why we're getting so much AI, as you call it, spit out. I think that's an interesting metaphor that you're using instead of just its output. We do have a sense that it's just spitting it out a little bit. We're seeing it like in tweets and social media and things like that. And it's so much in social media. It's in YouTube. It's just, especially the video things. One thing I saw was these pictures with this boa constrictor doing all these different things. This boa constrictor was with a polar bear. Like, how did they're just ridiculous. Somebody said, have a boa constrictor fighting a polar bear. Well, they're not going to be anywhere around each other.
Right.
You would see that, but it's real dramatic.
And then you see your friends post under it, wow. Don't you realize that's not real?
I know. So it's, which, is one of the arguments is that it's really hurting critical thinking and that kind of thing. So,
yeah, I can see that. I really thought it's so, we knew, people have been talking about this for years, that this was coming, that this was actually coming down the line. And I'm still amazed that as much as we talked about it before it was actually put out there for everyone, that there's still so many people who seem to be caught off guard.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's what's amazing.
I was when the first student used it. I said, "What is this? How come this student's writing this way all of a sudden?" And then I said, "Oh, that's what's going on." And then I saw it all the time after that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, as I have been managing editor for a couple of projects, and I get other things written by people, there are some writers that I accept their work several times, and then I have to massage them, edit them, make them fit in the space that we need it. And there was somebody that was a beautiful writer. I mean, just beautiful. And the last thing that she sent to me didn't sound anything like herself.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you can actually put things into the reverse AI, thing to see how much of it was actually written by AI. I think Grammarly has a free one, but there's a lot of services out there where you can upload stuff to see if it's AI written. And she had written a lot of it through AI. So, it's just, and there, you think to yourself, okay, that person had so much talent. She had the gift of storytelling. Why did she choose to use it? Okay, well, I know the answer to that. It's time.
Yeah.
It's just too tempting. It's like, I can work on this for 5 hours after I interview everybody and get all of the information, or I can work on it for an hour and do something else this afternoon. So I see where it's so tempting. It just should be used as a tool and not a crutch.
Yeah. So you said earlier that a lot of other writers, don't want to use it. Why do you think that is?
So I kind of think it's a purist view of I'm not going to use it because it's bad, but I don't feel that way because I agree with them as far as the fact that they're principled and it's something that they don't think is good for the world. Mm-hmm. So I understand that, but here again, I feel like I'm a very disciplined person, and that as long as I can be personally ethical at my use of it, I feel like I'm okay. But I also recognize the fact that not everybody can use it ethically. So, I also feel the genie's out of the bottle. It's just been in such widespread use. It's just, you can't put the genie back in once it comes out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you either get on board and learn how to use it as a tool, or you get left behind. And like I said, it's such a major time saver, and certain things that are, and I'm not talking about, content generation. Like I had other examples that I've written down. It helped me write assignment letters to hire writers. That was very helpful. It probably saved me 15 minutes for each one. Just in the last 3 weeks, I had to write a very uncomfortable email to a client. And I had been procrastinating doing that because I don't like those negative confrontations. But it was there was something that was very troubling to me, that I felt I had been wronged. I'm no good at writing things like that, or even having a phone conversation about that. So I typed in everything in one of the AI generators and said, help me write this email, make it direct, but also make it professional, and suggest a resolution at the end. And then I put in everything that I was unhappy with or upset about, or some facts, and it did it really well. And then, of course, like I said, everything that I've ever used it for, I go in and I clean it up quite a bit, put it in my voice, change words, and things like that. But it did help me write a very uncomfortable email letter that actually was very well received. And so this problem that I was having with that client was resolved within 2 days. And it's made me wonder, had I written the email all alone by myself, could I have written it so direct and professionally that it got a result that it got? I don't answer to that. I had actually sat down and tried to start the email 2 or 3 times. It just was not going well.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting story. I think, because you provided it the content, though.
Mm-hmm.
What it did was structure it in a set, and started it and ended it, I guess. So that's interesting. Yeah, my uses of it pretty much has been. I used it to make up some quiz questions. I put in some. And I did this more as an experiment, just to play with it, than I actually used it, because I wrote, the other faculty and I wrote a textbook, and a lot of people want test banks for it. And so we wrote them, but then at this point, it's been years. And so they're probably out in the public domain every year. So I said, and I just tell people now, you should just use the AI to write the quiz questions. I said, you have to check them. You don't just use them, but they are at a starting point. And so I just tell people to do that now. Just put the chapter, cut and paste it, put in the chapter and say, I need 15, true, false questions or multiple choice questions or something, and it does that again, but you have to edit them. And then I use it for brainstorming. Like if you have to come up with topics for students to do something, that's helpful. So it's for brainstorming, but as a writer myself, it's just the concept of just saying, write for me something, and then just tweaking a little bit and then just saying, here it is. I mean, it's like,
Right. I know people use it that way. I can't really say that I've used it like that.
Yeah.
Although at the beginning, and do you remember you had a book signing at Dalton State College? This was a while back, and I think it was Sudden Future. I had to look at my bookcase to see which one it was.
Yeah. Years ago.
Somebody brought up the topic at the end of your book talk that night about AI, and it was pretty new. Yeah, it was like just kind of hitting the headlines, and people were reaching out. And I was sitting there with other writers, and several of them said, well, it's never going to replace writers. It just can't. And I said, I think it can in some cases.
Yeah.
And then what we had just done, and I remember sharing it that night, was, so I have a lot of writing actually out on the internet, because I've written for magazines for several years, and I've written for other, newspapers and clients. Well, just the week before your book signing, we had done a test, me and another friend, and I said, write 200 words about a bicycle in the voice of Amber Nagle.
Mm.
When it spit it out, I was shocked because it knew my voice. And Barbara, you've read my stuff, so I kind of have a little folksy tone. I'm a Georgia girl, and so a lot of my writing is very country. And anyway, and it knew it, and it put some things in there that were spot on. And then it also over exaggerated things, kind of, like it might say, and I thought, wow, well, doesn't that butter my biscuit? Okay, well, I would have never said that, but it realized that was kind of a little bit of my writing style. And so it was trying, and it almost got there. But I was shocked, and it was like, okay, they say it's going to get better and better and better at doing this, and it has. the person that I was sitting with that week, we did it with him as well. He has written extensively on the topic of philanthropy. And so we did the same thing with him, write 200 words about, giving money to causes that provide assistance during emergencies, and write it in the tone and style of, and we said his name, and it managed to do a decent job of his too. So we were both just kind of shocked that week.
Yeah, that's a little freaky. That's shocky. Yeah. Okay. Well, wow. Well, I think you're probably the biggest expert that I could have talked to about this, because a lot of people, a lot of my friends are academics and they hate it or they love it, but they're not writers. So they, although personally, I think if their attitude is, well, if the students use it, it's okay, but I would say you wouldn't say that if they were cheating on a test, in
Right.
biology, you would not like that. So for writers to use it without just to spit something out, again, to use that metaphor, and say that you did it and get a grade for it is the same as cheating, and because it's because of the point you're trying to prove to the teacher that you can write and you've learned the content of writing, and so that's unethical. But if there's an understanding, I think that it's been used as a tool. That's one thing. I recently was doing some research on something and I came across an article and I noticed after the fact that it says this article is AI generated. And the funny thing was that it had some sources in it. When I checked the sources didn't have anything to do with the topic of the paper, of the article. I said, well, which is one thing from an academic standpoint that, its use of sources is really problematic. It doesn't do that well at all.
Right.
And perhaps it will one day, but right now it's really, really not good. So I just, the ethical concerns. I also, I don't know if you follow the news on this very much, but last week, the AI of Twitter or X, it went all Nazi on people. Did you hear about that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was so strange.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just like everything else. It's trained.
Yeah.
So it's trained. So somehow, it just doesn't develop its own ideas and concepts. It was trained on that.
Yeah.
So
it was told to go and scrape those kinds of sites is all I can say.
Right. So, and I think that everybody just kind of needs to be aware of that. Like we were talking about earlier, we've known that this was coming for a long time. We've talked about the dangers. We've talked about things that we're going to have to be careful of and be skeptical and keep an open mind, and not just you see something, you think it's fact. There's so much misinformation out there. And there's so many pictures now that have been photoshopped. Even before AI, people were photoshopping pictures. So, but I want to go back to something you said about as a college professor, how you want to ensure that your students are getting the basics. So you want them to sit down in front of you and actually write a paper or, show me, demonstrate that you have understood the content in my class. Okay. So I was in college in the 80s and, that I was in engineering school. And so we all used calculators. Every single one of us used like a very, very, sophisticated calculator. Yeah. But there were certain times when we were not allowed to use calculators when we were taking exams, because we had to demonstrate that we actually knew how to do the problem, how to solve the problem without the use of that tool. And so it would be the professor would say, no calculators on the test. And then even that day, someone would come in and they'd have a calculator and he would say, nope, and put it on his desk or her desk. And we would all have to do it ourselves. And we learned how to do it. But then, of course, I use a calculator all the time. And has it dumbed me down? Yeah, it has. you know,
But,
I think that's everybody.
it's like GPS. People don't know how to read a map anymore.
Exactly.
And I don't know phone numbers. I used to know a whole bunch of phone numbers. I don't know phone numbers anymore.
Exactly.
Enough 5, that I could call.
That's right. I think as humans, we tend to get a little bit lazy. We tend to lean on things a little bit. And I think it's going to be a lot like that. And of course, that has nothing to do with the fact that it's being trained on other people's work. That's a matter.
Yeah,
that's totally separate from this. It's an ugly side, but the music industry and people stealing music, they've encountered that. People paint things that look like somebody else's paintings.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that it's a bridge that we'll have to cross, and we'll have to figure out the framework to go forward with this. But from a user standpoint, it's a tool. And as long as I know its limitations, know my limitations, and kind of work carefully and ethically, I think that's kind of how I'm just going to continue to move forward. Now, also, I had a few more notes because you said that you wanted to talk about freelancing a little bit. Another thing that I've used it for is for book cover ideas. So, a lot of freelancers also have books out there. And so a lot of times you can't find stock photos to do something that you want. And so the last thing that I published last year, Seeing is Believing, it's just a collection of stories that I'd published in a newspaper. But I started out with a couple of stories. One of the stories was about a dandelion, and I went on and I was going to buy a $35 shot of a dandelion. And but I just couldn't find one that in my mind, I had the way I wanted it. And also I'd gone to the bookstore and looked at what the trend in book covers were. I kind of wanted to use certain colors and certain styles. So I came home and I thought, well, let me try it. And I did. And then I took what it spit out, took it into Photoshop and changed it a lot and used it on the cover of that book. So it's good for things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many applications, and I hear people talk about different things they've used it for all the time, and it really is an amazing tool. It's a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Well, Amber, I thank you. We went on longer than I told you, and so I appreciate your time because your time is very valuable. And I just want to thank you for your time and for your wisdom and your experience that you can share with us. And for some reason, my dog, we'll be real here and not edit that out. My dog is asleep, but having a dream and is asleep. So that's real life. So sometimes I think we want to edit life to where it's just so perfect and everything, but life is not perfect. So thank you again. And
thank you.
You guys who are listening, look out for Amber's writing because you will enjoy it and get a lot out of it.
Wasn't that a fascinating dialogue? I had been doing this podcast since April 2022, as I said earlier, and there is not a one of them where I did not have fun and learn a lot. So what else can you ask for? I would sincerely invite you to go back and listen to the archive. Even from the beginning, all of them are worth listening to, but a few I would point you to. Luc Manget's, where we talk about his book, Ginseng Diggers. David Cady, where we talk about his book, Religion of Fear, which really astounded me. K.B. Ballantyne, who talks about and reads her poetry. Aaron Mortera, who started a music school for children of immigrants in Greensboro, North Carolina. Aaron is married to Aaron is the brother of my daughter-in-law. Noah Knox Marshall, a filmmaker you want to know about, and who is coming out soon with a new film, Vicary. Amanda Haley, an archaeologist. Well, I could go on, and I probably already offended someone by not including them. You will be surprised by the names in the archive. Ray Atkins, Renee Winchester, Amanda Brown and the Dalton Creative Arts Guild, the John C. Campbell Folk School, Jerry Dry, Ryan Reese, Josh Rubin, and many more. Occasionally I go solo, which I'll be doing a few times this summer, or I go on the road with interviews and narration. This podcast is a labor of love. I really need listeners to post this to their social media feeds and websites. That would really help. I'm grateful for every listener, just like I am grateful for every reader of one of my books. There is so much content out there that you don't have to listen to or read me necessarily. I hope I provide voices that enrich your understanding of the arts, creativity, and the community. If you wish to help with the costs for this nonprofit work, there's a GoFundMe link on the website. As always, thanks to Clemencia Villafuerte, our brilliant producer who makes this sound good. Finally, I hope you will check out my books, especially Lying In, Sudden Future, Bringing Back Abundance, and the Scott Wallace Mysteries. I'm in the process of reissuing some of my self-published books, updating material and titles and covers where needed. Talk to you next time.